A drifter is only a poet with wings. He moves but he can't learn to fly. Running in footsteps ahead of his time, with no one to hear if he cries. With memories of your sweet love on the vine, I thumb my way south in the rain. Thinking of bridges I've burned in my life, each bridge causes somebody pain. But yesterday's apples are gone from the tree, sour grapes are gone from the vine.
Well, you can see how I'm doing that, so I'm just going to do the rest of it off camera, and I'll get it all routed out. What I'm trying to do is just leave the outside lines, and so I'm routing it small is basically what I'm doing. As I inlay the parts, if it's too small, well, I'll open it up a little bit. That way I get it a little tighter. Well, that's what the cavity looks like routed out. Again, I tried to stay within the lines. It's difficult to do. If you've ever done this kind of detailed work, you'll understand. But that's probably about as tight as you could hope to get it. And now I'll peel the label off and begin the process of putting the parts in there and seeing how well that goes. Well, I'm continuing to work on all the little detail-y things. I still haven't put the back on here yet, but that's okay. I want to get all the detail worked out. And Caleb even suggested, this is the true value of a apprentice. He made a suggestion that I'm actually going to follow. He suggested that I put this decorative end piece in here before I put the back on. That's a good suggestion. So there you go. He earned his Wheaties today. Anyway, I have precisely found the center line here, and I have also precisely measured off 1/2 inch wide strip here, perfectly square to the top. And I have this straight edge clamped to there. It's a steel ruler. And what I'll do is score it with my X-Acto knife a whole bunch of times. I don't think there's any more accurate way to cut it perfectly straight than to do it that way. It's not easy. It takes a little time, a little repetition, and you progressively push harder and harder on the X-Acto knife until you get it scored most of the way through the Paduk, if not all the way through. And then we'll get in here with a chisel and we'll clean all of this out. I'll have to do the same thing on the other side over here. By the way, these are not in the center of the center line. These were just allowed to run wild and get close. And this one is just barely close enough. It's almost on the outer edge line here. And this is just an arbitrary width. I can make it any width I want. I just selected a 1/2 inch. And a 1/2 inch is real close to this one here, so I don't have to do too much trimming over here. I'll show you progress as I go along. Mostly I'm going to be scoring here, and then I'll get a chisel out in just a moment. I was working with this end joint. I had made this piece. This was taken from like a Celtic design, and I just stretched it out is really what it amounts to. And I was going to put that in the end, but it still just isn't quite doing it for me. So I decided to line it with some maple on both sides, and I think that'll help set it off a little bit. Now, this doesn't really show it up very well yet either, but might give you an idea there that I'm going to border it with that white on both sides, of course. I can't fit them both in there. So I'm going to have to make the slot a little bit wider, and that's what I'm going to do next. You can see how I have this ruler clamped on here as a straight edge. I set my calipers to what I did was I measured from the edge of this with my calipers to the edge of the bit, and then I added 50 thousandths, which is the thickness of this white piece I'm putting in there. I've already routed this side and it's perfectly straight. It's as straight as that ruler is, at least. Now I'm basically going to do the same thing on the other side. Is I'm just going to take my calipers and just lay it in there, and then put the ruler right up against this edge right here, and it'll be exactly where I want it to cut the other 50 thousandths off the other side, and we should be good to go. Well, there's what she looks like stuck in there. It's not glued in yet. It's just sitting in there, but you can see it's in tight enough that it won't fall out. That's the way you want them, so that when you glue them, they'll really fill the space and you don't have cracks. But I'm a little bit concerned that it may be so tight, once I get the glue in there, I may have trouble getting the pieces in there. So I may take a spring pass on these two white pieces yet, just to make sure they're going to fit. But other than that, I think it's ready to glue in there. Well, I did take a little spring pass on these. In other words, just kissed the top of them. I didn't really take anything significant off. Even 1/1000th of an inch like that will help sometimes. Put the glue in here, spread it all around, and we'll see how it goes. I want to get it up on the sides. I want to make sure I get it on the edges of these two white pieces especially. I can't get it in there. Probably got it a hair tight. Went in there fine dry, but glued, it's not going. Having trouble getting it in there, so I don't know if I should take it out and start over or what I should do here. You can't see it at that angle very good, but that's the angle I needed at to work on it, I think. See if I can. I'm just gonna have to take it out of there because it's not working for me. See if I can do it like I did it earlier. I put that piece in first, then I put one of these pieces in at a time. I don't know if that'll work or not, but we'll see. That seems like that might work. I think that's working. I'm gonna get a little clamp here and start pressing those into place. I don't even think I'll have to clamp that. That forced in there so tight. I put a clamp all the way across there, squeezing it, moving it, squeezing it, moving it, and it clamped down tight. I pressed on the center. It's in there, let me tell you. I don't think you could get it out of there now without breaking it. So we'll let that set up and then we'll smooth it out and trim it up and see what it looks like. So there's what she looks like, sanded down, all smooth. I think that looks really nice. So we'll let that go for now and we'll move on to the next step. You might be able to see I've got the glue spread all the way around. I've done a lot of test fitting to make sure that this is ready to go, and I believe it is. So no time like the present. Just get after it and get it done.
Tomorrow a new life is starting for you, while nothing is changing in mine. A drifter is on.
Well, I've got the 4 clamps on there to kind of get it lined up, and now I'll do the rest of it off camera and I'll give you a look at it when I finish that part. You know, there's a quick look at it all clamped up. It seemed to clamp up really well, so I think we just got to give it 4 or 5 hours there, and then we can move on to the next step. It's late in the day. I took the clamps off this, so it's set up for 5 or 6 hours, probably something like that. And anyway, I started trimming the edges because the edges were a little proud of the sides, and so that's what I'm doing. Is I'm just cutting off the excess, so that when I start putting the binding on, it won't be so much to cut off. So you can see how I do that. I just take this finger plane and cut it off of there. Got to be careful. I try to cut where I'm angling away from the side, so if I slip, I don't hit the side. And you could use a flush trim router bit, I suppose, but what would be the fun in that, I guess? The problem with using that actually is that the back has got an arch to it and there's a slant to these sides, so it doesn't really work well. You could do it and make it work, but this really works just as well, and it only takes a few minutes. And I'm doing this kind of awkward for the camera here. Pretty much trimmed already, just a little more trimming, and then I'll be finished. I'll clean it up a little bit more, and then we'll move on to the next step. Well, now that I've got the clamps off and I've got the sides all cleaned up and everything, it's time for that celebratory tap on it to see if it has any sound. And I promise you I have not tapped on it yet, so I have no idea what the sound is going to be like. So here we go. It's really got some real punch. Matter of fact, you get it up to your ear and it hits you pretty hard. I don't know if it will make a difference hitting it this way. I'm going to hit it on the back now. It's got a nice deep sound. I don't hear anything rattling, so that's good and solid. The next thing is, I think, put the neck on. Gotta think about it a little bit, make sure I don't get it out of order, but I believe that's the next step. So we'll get to it. Well, as is often the case these days, I've changed my plans. Having a little conversation with Caleb there. He was saying, well, you're going to want to cut your binding before you mount your neck. Well, that's true, but I often cut the dovetail slot before I bind it. Because we have that newfangled Stumac jig that cuts these binding slots, it's actually easier to cut all the binding slots, I think, before I even route the pocket in here. So if I cut all the binding slots first, that'll make it easier, and just go ahead and put the binding on solid. It won't hurt anything, and then we can cut through that for the pocket later. At least I think that's my new plan. So I think I'm going to do the binding next, and then we'll cut the pocket for the neck. Well, my friends, it's at that binding time now. Just getting ready to put some binding around the top of this guitar. And what I typically do is put an inside purfling, is really what it is, and then an outside binding. Well, that's all well and good if everything works out. The problems you run into is cutting the slots to the proper size. And my buddy John Manura from accu-slice, look up accu-slice if you don't know what that is. It's a cool attachment, goes to a bandsaw like that and makes accurate stuff like these bindings that he sent me here. Hopefully the camera will focus. But he sent me some purfling that's Padauk, maple, Padauk, maple, Padauk. It's like 5 layers there. It's very thin, but there's 5 different colors there. And he also sent me this, by the way, which is a maple binding with some Padauk and some yellow heart in the middle of it. And that yellow heart kind of matches my yellow rose and yellow wood, so it all kind of goes together. Well, I want to sandwich that together like this, if that makes sense, from the top. This would be looking right on the top of the instrument, so that would go around the top perimeter. And when I sandwich those together, if I use the bigger one that he sent me, I don't have any combination of bearings and cutters that will make the right slot. So by using this little narrower purfling and using the binding here on the outside, I can look at my little, I more or less made this up. These are all the bushings and the size ledge that it cuts. That's the L, it would be the ledge. This here is the diameter of the actual bearing. But anyway, so I'm looking at all that, and when I put these together, the width of it is 144 thousandths. Well, the closest thing I've got is 140 thousandths. So that's what I'm going to do a test cut to see if this is going to work. Off camera, I did some test cuts on some test pieces with a different router. You understand the router doesn't make any difference. It's that bit that has the bearing on it that sets the depth. So it doesn't really matter what router you use. So I did some test cuts with it and it worked perfectly. So I spent some time getting this level and square and in the jig. This is the StuMac binding router outfit. The router itself I bought from Menards and just adapted it to work with this thing. You know, I'm not necessarily recommending that because I had to make an adapter plate and it was kind of complicated. And I may have to redo that because that spaces it up so high that the bit barely protrudes deep enough to cut the bindings. If you're going to get this jig, you probably want to get the router that they recommend. But this was a cheap router and it seems to be doing the job, you know, with those caveats. I've done a test cut right here where the neck would be and where the dovetail would be, so that way, you know, if it didn't work, I, you know, it wouldn't be trashing the guitar. But it seemed to cut fine. I've just measured it. Everything looks perfect, so I guess here we go. That worked fine, but then I got to thinking about it, and really you should do climb cuts when you get into this end grain. So I really want to start up here and cut down rather than cutting into this grain. The bit is spinning like this, and either way it'd be all right, I guess, but I think I'm going to start up here and go that way just because of the way the grain direction is. It has less chance for tear out that way. So here we go. Because I had the bit extended out so far, I'm going to do some testing to make sure I'm not getting any movement in the bit here. I don't want to be cutting deeper and deeper or something like that. So I'm going to check that real quick. I made a little more progress on it and I'm moving it around to this big bout here, and I'm going to go that way first and then this way.
A poet with wings, he moves but he can't learn to fly. Running.
Got a little spot right here that I either missed or made a boo-boo. I think I just missed it. I think it's okay. It looks a little like it cut in a little deep on the both of these little shoulders here, but that could just be optical illusion, I think. I think it worked okay. It's a nerve-wracking process because you could ruin everything you've done up to this point right here. It could just be a real mess. But it looks okay. I don't think I'm going to have any trouble. I think I'm happy with that. So I'll go on to the next step. Well, we're all set up. I've even made some modifications to the base. You know, I told you I'd put an adapter plate to make this work. Well, the thickness of it was creating problems with the bit extension sticking down through. So I took about 60 thousandths off the thickness, and that gives me 60 thousandths deeper that I can cut binding. And so that's perfect. It also allows me, you know, to keep the router about 60 thousandths more, which is a better deal because it bites a little bit better that way. But anyway, make a long story short, I'm about ready to try to cut this other binding. Oh, I didn't think of this problem. Now it's sitting on that shelf, and that thing really has a very narrow. I'm not so sure why they made that shelf so narrow on this thing. It'll work, but boy, I mean, it's just barely gonna work. I've got to be very careful. I guess in hindsight, I probably should have cut the side binding first and then cut the top binding by the design of this machine. The lip that rides on the top is very, very narrow. And because I've already cut this slot on the top, it's barely catching the top of the guitar now. It's wanting to ride down in this slot. So I'm going to have to be very careful. In fact, I think I'm going to get down on my knees and make sure I stay up on top of that. And I'll do a practice cut where the neck is first. There's a little practice cut there, so let's see how it fits with the binding. Really do have to be careful now because that could really create a problem. Well, it looks good. It looks like it's the right depth and everything. Actually, it might be cutting a little deep this way, so I'm probably going to raise it back up just a hair. Well, I'm glad I paused there and checked it, because it was cutting just a hair too deep down this way, but I'm in the neck area, so that's not going to show. That's why you test it in places. Raise the bit up compared to the base here, so it shouldn't cut quite as deep now. Guess we'll go ahead and cut the rest of it, see how it goes. Like I said, I'm going to get down on one knee to make sure I stay on that ledge, because that ledge is very thin at this point. Here we go.
Steps ahead of his time, with no one to hear if he cried.
Well, that was nerve-wracking to say the least, but I think it worked. So we'll move on to the next step. I've done a little test cut right here just to make sure that it all looks right. I have the sides square to the base because the sides is the important thing to cut square. I have a feeling that it's got to be a slight minute difference between the end cuts across the ends than it would be down the sides because of that. But that should be less effect than having the sides tilted, because I looked at the sides and they were tilted a lot when I got this level. So anyway, this is the lesser of the two evils in my opinion. I'm sure there are directions that I could look up or videos I could look up, but I'm not bothered with that. I think I've got it set the way I want it. So here we go.
South wind that blew in your life to warm you, but just for a while. I know what it...
Well, that turned out real nice. I think that's as good as it could be done. That is a very handy little machine for doing the binding. You know, that's about all I can say about it. It really seems to do a very, very nice job. They did a good job designing this. I really couldn't be much happier with it. I have no affiliation with StewMac, but when a product is good, I say it's good, and when it's not so good, you've heard me say that too. Off camera, I've made the back bindings for the guitar already, and now I'm going to start bending the top bindings, which is a little more complicated since there's an inner piece and an outer piece. And here we go. Again, this binding was all provided by John Manura of accu-slice. You may have saw in an earlier video where I mentioned he sent me this binding, but unfortunately I didn't have quite enough to do the guitar I was working on. He sent me a lot of different kinds of binding, but you know, there was like 4 pieces of each, which you would think that would be enough to do a guitar, but unfortunately by the time you go around the peg head and the fingerboard and all that stuff, then it takes more than just 4 pieces. So John saw that video and sent me quite a few extra pieces, so that was very kind of him. Thank you very much, John. Be sure to check out accu-slice on YouTube. Got my guitar sitting over here off camera that you can't really see, as you can show you here, and I'm going to be fitting these pieces every so often over here. And I'll start with the base side on the top here, and we'll do that one first. This is all real wood binding that was made with John's accu-slice machine off the bandsaw. Very accurate binding. I've checked his work here, and John does very accurate work with his machine. Man, there's like 1,000th variants down through here, and that's pretty darn good. You won't even find it from a quote-unquote factory any better than that. My little homemade bender here really works well. Very proud of it. Works perfectly. In fact, I can't imagine bending these sides and purfling and all this stuff without this anymore. This thing just works so well. There is a video out on my channel about building this, so check out the side bender, and I think I called it something like the world's best side bender. Now that I've been using it for over a year, I have to say it might be the world's best side bender. It truly is awesome. I presently have the temperature set at about 430 degrees Fahrenheit. Don't ask me what that is in Celsius, but I'm sure you can Google it and find out. I guess I would just say it's 430 degrees Fahrenheit and really hot in Celsius. If you don't believe me, well, just touch it. You'll find out real quick. It has instructions on it built in that says, "Let go of me." You can't misread those instructions either, trust me. I guess I should say that those instructions are written in every language. Let go of me, because it will burn you in a heartbeat. It is really hot. I saw the video where John made this binding, and that's out there on his channel as well. And I know he used Type Bond 3, and that was an excellent choice. It seems to bend really good under heat, and it doesn't turn loose. So many times when you're working with these laminated bindings, even the plastic ones, I've had them turn loose, the laminations. And these so far, John, have not turned loose at all. So you did a great job, my friend. I mean, like they haven't turned loose even a little bit. Okay, that takes care of number one. I'm going to turn the camera off, bend number two, and then when I get to bending this, I'll turn the camera back on. Okay, it only took me a couple of minutes to bend the other side on that very thin purfling. You've been noticing I've been using this aluminum strap here, and I don't know where I got this very thin aluminum. I can't remember if I cut it out of a tin can, and I kind of think I did. But anyway, it's very thin aluminum, and it works great. To keep the wood from breaking, you need the metal on the other side, and you pull the metal more than you're pulling the wood. You try to keep pulling the metal and let the metal spread the stress out, where if you just bend the wood, it stresses in one spot and it will break. Trust me, I learned that the hard way. Or as they say in many videos, ask me how I know. Let the metal do the bending. It really works a lot better. And you can go pretty fast. The metal also serves to hold the water in the wood a little bit longer, so you get that steaming effect. You couldn't put this in a steamer and do it near as fast as I can do it this way. It would take you just as long to get your temperature up for the steam and, to get everything soaked as it does for me to be. I'm done when I'm, by the time you get that far, I would be done. You can see there how quickly that bends. And it's flexible enough that you can bend it more if you need to, on the fly as you're taping it in or whatever. It works really, really well. I will tell you there's one tricky part about this. If you're using multi-stranded binding like I am, you can see the stripes on the bottom. The stripes generally go on the bottom, so you have to make sure you get this all oriented right when you're bending it. Otherwise you'll have the stripes on the top. And on the first piece you can just flip it over, but on the second piece you better have it right. And if you don't understand what I mean there, if you don't have it right on the second piece, then you'll have two pieces that work well on your right side or your left side, but not on the other side. That's what it boils down to. So they are side specific. Just one more bend on this and I'm finished with this side, and I'll bend the other side off camera, and then we'll move back over to the bench and we'll show you putting the binding on. I'll say one more thing about John's binding is that he was good at choosing wood with nice straight grain that bends very easy. This is some of the easiest bending wood I've ever seen, really. It works really, really good. So I would say it wasn't John's first rodeo. I know he's built some guitars too. So there you go. We got the first side bent. I'll bend the other one off camera, as I said. You can see the guitar is top down, laying here on my bench. And I've got this wonderful binding from John Manura here that I'm about ready to apply. It's all been pre-bent, and I've got my glue container cleaned out well enough to put some glue on here. I was just saying to Caleb, I wonder when the glue manufacturers are going to make their glue just bad enough that it doesn't stick to the glue nozzle. You know, in other words, you go to them and you say, could you make your glue a little less sticky, please? Because that's about where you're at there. Because the glue sticks so well, it sticks well to everything. I think I'm going to go ahead and apply glue for a little ways here around this. I think I'll just use a brush to put it in there. Sometimes I use a little glue paddle or squeegee or something, but I think the brush works as well as anything, if not better. Especially when you got odd shapes like this ledge. Now the trick is, by eye, I'm just going to line it up where I think the middle of this joint is here. It looks pretty good to me. As DeResta says, if it looks straight, it is straight. So that's straight to me. I didn't tear off any pieces of tape ahead of time, which would be helpful. As you apply this tape, you really try to pull everything in as tight as you can. You pull as hard as you can pull on the tape without breaking the tape. It's kind of an acquired skill. I also try to wipe off as much of the glue as I can as I go. You get quite a bit of glue squeeze out there, and it's nice to keep it as clean as you can keep it. Well, you can see the process. I'm not going to spend a lot more time showing you that. I'm just going to go all the way around here, and if I have anything interesting pop up, I'll show it to you. Well, you can see what it looks like after I got it all done. I've already started taking the tape off. It's been sitting for 4 hours or longer. The truth of the matter is, my hands hurt so bad after I got this done because I'm pulling constantly with my fingers, and I couldn't do anymore. I was going to go ahead and do the other side, but I had to go sit down and rest for a while. The arthritis in the hands has seriously gotten bad, and I can honestly, you know, I don't know. I hate to say anything on camera, but the truth of it is, this is among the last guitars I'll ever build. If it's not the last one, it's definitely among the last ones. There's not going to be many more. But it really did turn out nice. This binding really matches the coloring and everything because it's Padauk and yellow and Padauk. You know, we've got the yellow back here and the Padauk sides, and it's just looking real nice. It really does match the scheme very well. Honestly, even peeling this tape off is pretty darn painful. I'm not saying it for sympathy. I'm just trying to state the fact because you can't really tell what's going on just through a video, you know. And the truth of the matter is that the price of doing this is getting high. That's really the bottom line. I'll get the rest of this off of there, and I'll start on the other side and see how far I can make it. I've been playing with this off camera a little bit, and I guess I'm ready to try it. As I said, I'm just not sure I'm up to it. I hope I can complete it once I get started. That's all I guess I'm saying. This strains your hands a lot more than you might think. You're really pulling hard on the tape, and it's not all that easy just to get the binding to lay smooth. You got to pull pretty hard just for that. Now this one is a double binding, so that's even going to be a little tougher. I've gone to the thicker, wider tape. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. It might actually be better to use the narrower tape, and I gave that some thought, but I decided to go with the wider tape. I think maybe I can get a little tighter pull with that. I'm lining up this first piece with the center line and this piece of purfling also with the center line. And once I get that lined up, put a piece of tape on it and pull it as tight as I can get it, which is where the problem comes in with my hands, is pulling on that. It really hurts. Yeah, the wider tape does seem to hold pretty well. That's probably a good thing. And as you can see, that's how I'm putting it on there. So again, rather than just burn up a ton of footage, I'm just going to go ahead and finish this off camera. Probably just get this one side done and maybe take a break. Coming to the end of putting this first double binding on, and I was getting all kind of hyper here, thinking that I was going to have to match up these ends right here and make them perfect like you'd normally do, but in this case I don't have to, because that's where the dovetail goes, and it really doesn't matter whether the ends match up that well or not, because they're going to be cut out anyway. So I just snipped them off with the wire nippers there, or the side cutters, whatever you want to call them, and just cut it a little bit short, because it doesn't really matter. Like I said, there'll be a dovetail cut through this and won't make any difference. So now I've got to put the other side on, but I honestly do have to rest my hands again. Honestly, it's just not possible, I don't think, to do the second one right now. I'll have to give it a little time and let the hands rest a little bit. Way more stress on your hands doing this than you might think. Even if you weren't having trouble with your hands, when you get done stretching that and pulling that as hard as you're pulling for that many times, you would feel it in your hands. And the way my hands are, it more than just feeling right now, they're actually aching. So I got to stop for a little bit. But it's looking really beautiful. It's going together just about as perfect as you would ever hope. So we'll see how it goes when we move on to the next step here, which will be that side. Well, it's the next morning, and the double binding on the top has had all night to set up. I'm sure it's more than dry. And I'll be peeling all this tape off. Doesn't make for exactly exciting videos, so I'll show you what we do on our next step as we get to it. Well, my friends, I've taken all the tape off. I've sanded the back and the top flush. I sanded the top first because it's white, and so the binding, everything is perfectly flush on the top now. I have sanded the back then, and it's now perfectly flush. Now the sides are slightly proud, and I've already sanded the sides here. And before I sand it though, I take this straight edge razor blade and I go right along the edge like this, and I scrape off any glue and tape residue that's lingering. And like, here's tape residue, and so you just take a straight edge razor blade and scrape it off. It helps to get it off of there ahead of time, because it can kind of mar up your sandpaper and stuff. And that also gets rid of that extra glue squeeze out. And so it's worth doing, I think. Makes the sanding go a little easier, a little simpler. Now, it's a little tricky to sand the sides compared to the top and back, although it's not horrible. There's a little drop of glue squeeze out, and here's a little glue squeeze out right on the corner there. I don't know if you can see it, but anyway. The hardest part of, I guess, sanding the sides is when you get to these corners and things. Anyway, here's my technique. I'm using this Rockwell sander, Vibrate T, it says. Looking for the model number again. I know it's on here. RK428K. Apparently these are hard to come by now. So it's a really neat sander. This thing rotates one direction, this rotates in another direction, and it's orbital. So it really doesn't leave any marks. It's really a pretty cool deal.
Sweetheart, when you lose, but someday you'll look back and smile. I can't be your lover, you don't need a friend. I guess boys, that's the way.
Well, I'll give you some idea. It does a nice job, but you do have to be careful with this. If you would let this slip off the side and hit the top with this thing vibrating, it would make a really nasty mark in there. You can also see that it doesn't take long to get discoloration on there with this red wood, orange wood, whatever you want to call it. It does a nice job. You'll have to go back. There will be, little minor imperfections, like right there is a little tiny fill spot, and I'll save a lot of this dust and we'll go back and fill these spots. So it's not perfect, but it's handmade, and it's not like a factory made instrument where everything is perfect. They can pretty much slap those things together because they're made on a CNC machine and everything just fits perfectly. This is not quite like that, but it's still as good as I can do for handmade. It's going to be very, very nice. But I got a lot more of that to do, so I'm just going to do that off camera. I have finished sanding the guitar. It is in really nice shape. Everything is perfectly smooth now. It looks really nice. Like I've mentioned before, there's always little minor detail stuff that needs to be fixed, and we'll do all that. Here's a pretty good look at the end. As you can see how that detail worked out. Pretty cool. The sides, pretty cool. It's really nice. So anyway, we're pretty much finished with the body here. I think our next step now is to start cutting the neck slot. So here we go.